The key to my late mother's house stopped halfway into the lock. Before I could try it again, a pregnant stranger opened the door holding a wooden spoon. Garlic and onions drifted out of the kitchen where my mother's rose-shaped clock had hung for 30 years. The woman smiled nervously and asked if she could help me. I said, "This is my house." She rested one hand over her stomach and said she and her husband had bought it 3 weeks earlier. My name is Rachel Mercer. The deed to that little blue house on Wren Street carried my name and no one else's. At least that was true when I left for a 12-week work assignment. When I called my husband, Daniel did not sound confused or frightened. He said, "I sold it, you gave me power of attorney." By that evening, he would insist he had done it to protect our future. What I did not know yet was that Daniel had already spent 6 months building a future in which I did not exist. My mother, Evelyn, died the previous November. She had lived on Wren Street since I was 6. The house was not grand. It had 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a front porch that leaned slightly toward the driveway because my father had repaired it himself and refused to admit the posts were uneven. After he died, Mom stayed there another 14 years. She knew every floorboard that clicked. She kept sugar in a blue ceramic jar and emergency cash inside an old recipe book nobody opened because all her recipes were written on index cards. The rose clock above the kitchen doorway ran 7 minutes fast. Mom said being early was cheaper than being sorry. When she got sick, Daniel was helpful. He drove her to appointments when I could not leave work. He installed a handrail beside the bathtub. On the last Christmas she was well enough to sit at the table, he cut her turkey and listened to the same story about my childhood piano recital twice. That history mattered because betrayal rarely begins with a villain walking into your life. Sometimes it begins with a person who earned your trust honestly and later decided the trust belonged to him. Mom left the house to me outright. There was no mortgage. Daniel and I already owned a home across town, so I was not ready to decide what to do with Wren Street. I spent weekends sorting clothes, labeling photographs, and stopping after 20 minutes because every drawer felt like another goodbye. Daniel wanted to sell. He said an empty house was a target for vandals and a drain on insurance. I said I would decide after the first anniversary of Mom's death. He called that sentimental, then apologized when I cried. In March, a windstorm tore shingles from the back half of the roof. Water stained the ceiling in Mom's bedroom. The insurance company wanted estimates, photographs, and someone available to meet an adjuster. At the same time, my employer offered me a temporary assignment in Oregon overseeing the conversion of 2 medical offices. The assignment came with enough extra pay to cover the roof deductible and most of the plumbing work the house needed. I accepted it. Daniel offered to handle Wren Street while I was away. The insurance adjuster kept changing dates. One contractor wanted a signature in person. Daniel said the cleanest solution was a power of attorney covering the property, insurance claim, and repair contracts. I hesitated at the phrase power of attorney. He laughed and said, "Rachel, I'm replacing shingles, not stealing your mother's house." I remember that sentence exactly. We met with a notary at our bank. The form was broader than I expected. It authorized Daniel to sign real estate and financial documents connected to Wren Street. I asked whether we could narrow it. Daniel said a limited form had already been rejected by one contractor's lender and reminded me that my flight left in 4 days. The notary told me I could revoke the authority at any time. I signed. Then I looked Daniel in the eye and said, "Repairs only. You do not list the house. You do not accept an offer. You do not sell anything." He kissed my forehead and said, "I know what this house means to you." For the first 3 weeks in Oregon, he sent photographs. New shingles, drywall removed from the bedroom ceiling, paint samples lined up on Mom's kitchen counter. When I asked why the work seemed to be moving so quickly, he said he had found an investor who gave Harbor and Pine Restoration better contractor rates. Harbor and Pine was an old name. Daniel had started the company with his college friend Marcus Bell 5 years earlier. They bought small houses, renovated them, and tried to resell them. Their first project made money. Their second sat empty for 11 months. Their third nearly took our savings with it. 2 years before Mom died, Daniel told me Harbor and Pine had closed. He showed me a final tax statement and said he was done gambling with renovation projects. I believed him because our marriage needed me to. 9 weeks into my assignment, the Oregon project ended early. A permit dispute stopped construction, and my company sent me home nearly 3 weeks ahead of schedule. I did not tell Daniel. I wanted to surprise him. He was supposed to be supervising paint at Wren Street, so I drove there directly from the airport with my suitcase in the trunk. There was a white sport utility vehicle in the driveway, 2 small bicycles leaned against the porch, a yellow wreath I had never seen hung on the front door. Then my key failed. The pregnant woman introduced herself as Lee. Her husband, Sam, came into the hallway behind her carrying their little girl's shoe. They were not investors. They were a family who had used their savings and a loan from Sam's parents to buy their first home. Lee showed me a photograph on her phone from closing day. She and Sam stood on the porch beside a real estate agent holding a cardboard key. The blue siding, the crooked porch, and my mother's front window were behind them. I asked who had sold it to them. She said a company called Harbor and Pine Restoration. The name did not simply sound familiar. It was the company Daniel claimed had nearly bankrupted us and no longer existed. I stepped off the porch before I called him because I did not want Lee's children to hear me lose control. Daniel answered on the second ring. "You're home early," he said. He already knew where I was. Either Lee had messaged the agent or Daniel was monitoring the doorbell camera he had installed. I asked him why strangers were living in my mother's house. "They are not strangers," he said. "They are the buyers." He explained the sale as if we had discussed it. The roof revealed more damage. Insurance would not cover all of it. The market was strong. Marcus had found a clean offer and waiting would only cost us money. I said, "I told you not to sell. You signed the authority. For repairs." The document did not say repairs only. That was when I understood he had not taken advantage of a loophole he discovered later. He had insisted on the broad form because the authority to sell was the part he wanted. Daniel lowered his voice. He said I was standing outside in shock and needed to come home before I frightened an innocent family. He promised the money was safe. He said everything he had done was for us. He sounded so reasonable that for one second I almost believed he had made an unforgivable decision to save our marriage. But I did not know yet that he had spent half a year preparing to leave it. I apologized to Lee. I told her I was not going to force my way inside or blame her family. She gave me the name of the title company and the real estate agent from her closing packet. Before I left, the kitchen clock chimed from inside the house. It was not Mom's clock, it was an electronic sound, bright and unfamiliar. I sat in my car and cried harder over that little noise than I did when Daniel admitted the sale. My attorney, Nina Shaw, met me the following morning. She did not promise that one phone call would give me the house back. She read the power of attorney twice, then asked whether I had written down my instructions to Daniel. I had not. There were text messages about roof colors, contractors, and insurance. There was no message saying repairs only because I had set it across a bank desk while a notary watched me sign the opposite. Nino explained that Daniel had a duty to act for my benefit, not his. Selling below value to a connected company and redirecting the money could be a breach of that duty. It could also be fraud, but Lee and Sam had paid fair value in a later transaction and might qualify as innocent buyers. Undoing everything could take months or years and would hurt a family that had not betrayed me. First, we needed the records. The county file showed 2 sales. Daniel had sold Wren Street, acting under my name, to Harbor and Pine for $212,000. 5 weeks later, Harbor and Pine sold it to Leigh and Sam for $348,000. The house had been appraised at nearly that amount during probate. Daniel had transferred my property to his old company at a discount, then allowed the company to keep the profit from the real sale. Nina found Harbor and Pine's current registration. Marcus was still listed as manager. Daniel had been restored as a member 6 months earlier, 3 weeks before he first suggested I sell Mom's house. He had revived the company before the storm, before Oregon, before the power of attorney. The damaged roof had not created his plan, it had given him a deadline. I called our bank. The first sale proceeds had been deposited into a joint account Daniel and I rarely used. Within 2 days, nearly all of it had been transferred into Harbor and Pine as a capital contribution bearing both our names. There was no account holding money for our future. There was a company I had never agreed to rejoin. I revoked the power of attorney that afternoon. Nina recorded the revocation and sent notice to the bank, the title company, Harbor and Pine, and Daniel. We asked a judge to freeze the money still held by the company from the second sale. Then Daniel called me. He said I was destroying the only chance we had to recover what Harbor and Pine lost 2 years earlier. He said Marcus had identified 3 properties that could double our investment. He said the Wren Street house was sitting empty while an opportunity passed us. My mother died in that house, I said. And you were letting it rot because grief felt safer than making a decision. That sentence cut because part of it was true. I had delayed. I had left rooms untouched because sorting them hurt, but hesitation did not transfer ownership of my grief to him. I asked where Mom's belongings were. Daniel said everything important was safe in storage. He texted me an address and unit number, then told me he would not speak again until I stopped involving lawyers. The storage facility was on the industrial edge of town between an auto auction and a warehouse that sold restaurant equipment. The manager asked for my identification, then searched my name. The unit was mine. Daniel had opened it using the power of attorney and listed our home address for notices. The automatic payment had failed twice. The contents were scheduled for a lien auction the next morning. I asked how much I owed. The manager gave me a total that included late fees, lock replacement, and auction costs. I paid it before calling Daniel because I had learned what happened when I gave him time to explain. The manager cut off the red lock. When the metal door rolled upward, I smelled wet cardboard. Daniel had told me everything important was safe. Mom's life had been packed into the unit without shelves or plastic covers. Her dining chairs were stacked upside down against a mattress. Framed photographs lay face to face on the concrete. 3 boxes had softened where rainwater must have reached them during the move. I stepped between the boxes, calling out objects in my head as if taking attendance. Dad's tool chest, Mom's winter coat, the blue sugar jar, my high school yearbooks, the quilt my grandmother made. The rose clock was inside a laundry basket beneath a bag of extension cords. 1 petal had broken from the wooden frame. The hands were stopped at 9 minutes after 4. It was 2 minutes later than Mom always kept it. I sat on the concrete and held that clock against my knees. For months I had been afraid that selling the house someday would mean losing my mother again. Daniel had done something worse. He had decided which parts of her life were worth protecting, packed the rest like trash, and almost let strangers bid on all of it by the box. My sister Amy arrived with her van and 2 friends. We spent 6 hours moving everything into a dry unit under a new account only I controlled. Some things were missing. Mom's wedding ring was gone, so was the walnut desk my father built and a set of silver serving pieces that had belonged to my grandmother. Daniel later claimed an estate company sold those items to cover repair costs. There was no inventory and no check paid to me. Near the back of the unit, Amy found a plastic file crate from Daniel's old home office. It had probably been swept up with the boxes during the move. Most of it contained dead Harbor and Pine paperwork. 1 folder was new. It held an operating agreement dated 6 months earlier. Daniel owned 40% of the revived company. His contribution was described as cash and access to a residential acquisition on Wren Street. My mother's address was not an opportunity Marcus discovered. It was the asset Daniel had promised when he bought his way back into the business. Behind the agreement was a lease application for an apartment at Rivergate Towers. Daniel had listed himself as separated. The lease began the week after my assignment was supposed to end. He had not sold Mom's house because our marriage needed money. He had sold it because his new company and his new apartment both required a future he could fund before I came home. The following day, Nina confirmed that Daniel had consulted a divorce attorney before I signed the power of attorney. He had not filed anything. He was waiting for Harbor and Pine to close 2 more deals and increase his income. The plan was simple once I stopped looking for the man who had helped my mother into a car. Daniel intended to use my house as his investment, let the company hold the profit, establish a separate residence, and announce the end of our marriage after his financial position improved. If the business succeeded, he would leave with momentum. If it failed, he would tell me he had risked everything for us. Either way, I carried the loss. I asked Daniel to meet me at the apartment he had leased. Amy came with me and waited in the car. Rivergate Towers had gray stone counters, silent elevators, and a lobby that smelled like cedar. Daniel answered the apartment door wearing the watch I gave him for our 10th anniversary. Behind him were 2 suitcases, a new sofa, and framed photographs from our house stacked against the wall. He had taken pictures of his parents, his college friends, and himself on hiking trips. There was no photograph of me. He asked how I found the address. I held up the operating agreement. Daniel closed his eyes, then he stepped aside and invited me in as if manners could still establish innocence. He said he had planned to tell me everything after Oregon. Our marriage had been unhappy for years. I cared more about a dead woman's furniture than the life we could still build. He needed something that belonged to him before he left. So you took something that belonged to me, I said. He said marriage made the distinction complicated. I placed 3 documents on his new kitchen counter: the revoked power of attorney, the motion to freeze Harbor and Pines funds, the first page of my divorce filing. Daniel read them without touching them. "You're going to destroy our future over a house you weren't using?" he asked. "You didn't sell my past to build our future," I said. "You sold it to pay for yours." He told me I was being dramatic. He said lawyers would consume more than the house was worth. He warned that Lee and Sam could lose their home if I challenged the deed. For the first time, he sounded afraid for innocent people. I knew the concern was useful to him, but the people were still innocent. Nina gave me 2 legal paths. We could seek to unwind both transfers and make ownership of Wren Street the center of a long fight. Or we could let Lee and Sam keep the house while pursuing Daniel, Marcus, and Harbor and Pine for the lost value, the resale profit, the missing property, and misuse of the power of attorney. I chose the second path. That choice did not mean Daniel kept what he took. The court froze most of the profit still sitting in Harbor and Pine's account. Marcus settled rather than explain the 2 closings under oath. He surrendered Daniel's company interest and paid back part of the price difference. As part of our divorce settlement, Daniel signed over his share of our marital home and accepted responsibility for the remaining business debt. The district attorney reviewed the file but did not promise criminal charges. Nina warned me from the beginning that misuse of a real signature could be harder to prosecute than a forged one. The civil case was clearer, it was also slower. There was no morning when I woke up and everything had been restored. Lee and Sam kept Wren Street. I met them once at Nina's office to sign an agreement releasing their title from my claim. Lee was 8 months pregnant. She apologized for living in my mother's house even though she had done nothing wrong. I told her the house had always sounded best with children in it. She asked if there was anything I wanted back. During their move, they had found an old pencil mark inside the pantry door with my height and the date I started 7th grade. I left it there. Daniel and I divorced 11 months after I came home from Oregon. He moved out of Rivergate when Harbor and Pine's account was frozen and took a smaller apartment near his work. The revived company did not survive the settlement. He sent one apology after the divorce became final. He admitted he had convinced himself I would eventually thank him if the investment succeeded. He said every document felt temporary while he signed it. The company would make money, the apartment would give him space. The divorce consultation was only information. He kept renaming permanent betrayals until they sounded like flexible plans. I believed he regretted the outcome. I do not know whether he regretted the choices before they failed. I sold our marital house after the divorce. Keeping it would have meant maintaining another building full of decisions Daniel and I made together. I rented a small apartment with a bright kitchen and no yard. Most of Mom's furniture would not fit. Amy took the dining table. I kept the blue sugar jar, the quilt, Dad's tool chest, and the photographs we managed to dry. The broken rose from the clock is still in a paper envelope because I have not decided whether to glue it back. On my first night in the apartment, I hung the clock above the kitchen doorway. The mechanism had rusted in storage, so I replaced it. I set the hands 7 minutes fast. For a while the ticking sounded too loud in the small room. There was no refrigerator hum from Wren Street, no porch door, no mother moving down the hall, just one repaired clock measuring time in a place she had never seen. I used to think inheritance meant keeping what someone left exactly where they left it. Daniel taught me how easily a house, a signature, and a marriage could be transferred while I was still calling them mine. But he did not get to decide what survived him. The clock is missing one wooden pedal, the house belongs to another family, my mother's ring is still gone. None of that becomes less true because I won part of the money back. Every morning, the clock tells me I am 7 minutes late when I am actually on time. I know the difference now.